This man built a billion-dollar empire, but started by selling photocopiers on the streets. He wasn't qualified for his first banking job, yet today he owns private jets, global banks, and Africa's most iconic hotel. How did he do it? Let's find out. Tony Onyemechi Elumelu was born on March 22, 1963, in Jos, Nigeria, a city better known for its tin mines than its millionaires. He was one of 5 children in a modest middle-class family. His parents weren't rich, but they were determined. And for Tony, that meant one thing: education was non-negotiable. He started at St. Patrick's Primary School, right there in Jos. But as a teenager, his life took a significant turn. His parents sent him far south to complete secondary school at Federal Government College in Warri. That decision would quietly shape his destiny. Warri exposed him to a different Nigeria. New cultures, new systems, new ambition. It wasn't just a change of location. It was a shift in perspective. He later enrolled at Bendel State University, now known as Ambrose Alley University, to study economics. And while he graduated with a second class lower, a grade that often closes doors, Tony saw it differently. To him, it was just the starting point. Because he didn't want to just study economics, he wanted to live it. He would later pursue a master's degree in economics at the University of Lagos, refining his understanding of markets, finance, and value creation. But back then, no one would have guessed this quiet, focused young man would one day run one of the biggest banks in Africa. Not even Tony himself. After graduating, Tony did what most Nigerian graduates do. He enrolled in the National Youth Service Corps, serving at Union Bank, one of the most respected commercial banks in the country. It was his first real taste of the banking world. He was hooked. The suits, the numbers, the structure. He saw a future in finance. But when the one-year program ended, the dream crashed. Union Bank didn't offer him a permanent role. For many, that would have been the end of the story. But Tony, he pivoted. With no job offers and no connections, he started selling photocopiers and office equipment on commission, literally going door to door in the chaos of Lagos. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was survival. And maybe more importantly, it was education. Tony later said that those street hustles taught him the most valuable skills of his life: sales, grit, confidence, and the power of persistence. Then came a moment that would change everything. All States Trust Bank, a small commercial bank at the time, announced openings for graduate positions. Tony had just completed his master's degree. He felt ready, but there was one huge catch. The job required a minimum of a second-class upper degree, something he didn't have by academic standards. He was already disqualified. Most people would have walked away, but Tony didn't. He filled out the application anyway. And then, in the cover letter, he did something bold, something unheard of. He acknowledged the elephant in the room. I know I do not meet the academic requirement, but if you give me a chance, I will prove myself. No excuses, no begging, just confidence, just truth. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Days later, the bank called him, not to reject him, but to invite him for the screening process. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he showed up anyway. And out of hundreds of applicants, Tony Elumelu got the job. The man with the wrong degree had just entered the banking world, and this time, he wasn't leaving. When Tony walked into All States Trust Bank, he wasn't just starting a job. He was on a mission. He knew he had something to prove. Every morning, he arrived before his team. Every night, he stayed later than everyone else. He wasn't the smartest. He didn't have the best degree, but he outworked everyone, period. Within just 12 months, he went from data analyst to branch manager. Let that sink in. At just 27 years old, Tony Elumelu was managing a full branch of a Nigerian bank in one of the most competitive financial markets in Africa. It was unheard of. In an industry where promotions take years, sometimes decades, Tony had leapt across layers of hierarchy like they were stairs. And he didn't do it with office politics. He did it with results. His leadership caught the eye of the bank's top brass, including the CEO, who had read his cover letter personally. They saw what others didn't: a rare mix of humility, hunger, and vision. This was more than just a promotion. This was proof that betting on Tony Elumelu had been the right call. And for Tony, it was fuel. He knew this couldn't be the finish line. It was barely the beginning, because something was becoming very clear. He wasn't just good at banking, he was born to lead. By the late 1990s, Tony Elumelu wasn't just climbing ranks. He was outgrowing them. He'd proven himself at every level. But something inside him said, you weren't born to climb someone else's ladder. You were born to build your own. In 1997, at just 34 years old, Tony made a move that most would have called insane. He and a small team of young, ambitious professionals approached the owners of a struggling, near-dead financial institution, Standard Trust Bank. The bank was bleeding. The public had lost faith. The shareholders were desperate. But Tony, he saw gold in the wreckage. Where others saw risk, he saw leverage. He acquired the bank through a distress sale, a high-stakes, high-pressure deal that would place him as CEO of a full-fledged commercial bank. At just 34 years old, he became one of the youngest banking CEOs in Nigeria's history. But he wasn't in it just for the title. He immediately crafted a 3-tier transformation plan that sounded almost delusional at the time. Revive the bank and make it profitable. Enter the top 10 banks in Nigeria within 7 years. Become one of the top 3 banks in the country within 10 years. Even his supporters thought it was ambitious. But Tony had a formula. Surround yourself with smart people. Set impossible goals. And then outwork the world. In less than 7 months, the numbers spoke for themselves. Standard Trust's revenue skyrocketed from 6.49 million naira to over 473 million naira. And just like that, the crazy plan wasn't so crazy anymore. Tony wasn't just turning around a dying bank. He was rewriting what was possible in African finance. And the best part? He was just getting started. By 2004, Standard Trust Bank wasn't just healthy, it was dominating. Tony Elumelu had achieved what no one thought possible. But his original 3-phase plan? He was ahead of schedule. And that's when he made his boldest move yet. In 2005, Tony orchestrated the largest banking merger in sub-Saharan Africa at the time. Standard Trust Bank would merge with the historic United Bank for Africa, better known as UBA. UBA was old money, established in the 1940s. But it was bloated, bureaucratic, and losing relevance. Tony brought the spark, the energy, the future. The merger sent shockwaves through Nigeria's financial system. And overnight, Tony Elumelu became CEO of one of the most powerful financial institutions on the continent. But power wasn't the end goal. Global influence was. Under Tony's leadership, UBA didn't just grow. It exploded. 20 countries across Africa, branches in London, Paris, and New York. And notably, the only African bank licensed to operate in the United States. That's not just big. That's historic. And while other banks were playing it safe, Tony and his team were doing what they always did, thinking in decades, acting in days. Internally, he instilled a culture of what he called stretch targets, setting goals that seemed absurd, and then beating them. One success became fuel for the next, and one continent was no longer enough. At Harvard, the world's top business professors took notice. Tony Elumelu's leadership became an official Harvard Business School case study, reserved for the very few, studied by students around the globe, and proof that an African CEO could set global standards. In 2010, after a central bank policy limited the tenure of bank CEOs to 10 years, Tony Elumelu stepped down from his executive role at UBA. But if anyone thought he was retiring, they didn't know Tony. He didn't slow down. He scaled up. He launched Heirs Holdings, a private investment firm with a bold mission: build Africa's next generation of companies across multiple industries: energy, healthcare, real estate, and hospitality. That last one would become the stage for one of Tony's most powerful moves yet. Enter Transcorp Hilton Hotel, Abuja, the most prestigious hotel in Nigeria, frequented by presidents, billionaires, and global CEOs. Tony started small, acquiring a few shares quietly through Heirs Holdings. No press, no headlines, just strategy. Over time, his stake grew. And when the then chairman, Femi Otedola, faced financial pressure, Tony made his move. He didn't just buy the shares, he bought control, both in Transcorp and in African Finance Corporation, where Otedola also held assets. And the most shocking twist? When Otedola agreed to sell his Transcorp shares, he believed he was selling them to an American firm. It wasn't. It was Tony Elumelu, operating through intermediaries. A silent takeover, executed with precision, no drama, just dominance. Today, Tony sits as chairman of Transcorp Group, overseeing assets in power generation, oil, gas, and hospitality. From selling photocopiers on the street, he now controls one of Africa's most influential business portfolios. And every move, calculated, controlled, complete. After conquering the worlds of banking and investment, Tony Elumelu set his sights on something even bigger. Not markets, not assets, people. In 2010, the same year he stepped down as CEO of UBA, Tony launched the Tony Elumelu Foundation with a personal commitment of $100 million. Its mission? Simple, but bold. Empower the next generation of African entrepreneurs. At first, critics called it PR, another billionaire vanity project. But a decade later, the numbers shut them down. 20,000 plus entrepreneurs directly funded, 1.5 million. Plus Africans reached through digital programs, startups launched in every region of the continent. And it's not just cash, it's mentorship, training, networks, belief. Tony calls his philosophy Africapitalism, the idea that the private sector, not foreign aid, holds the key to Africa's long-term prosperity. If we empower young Africans economically, we can transform the continent permanently. He doesn't just donate, he invests in people, in hope, in futures. And that's what sets him apart. While others build wealth to keep, Tony builds to multiply. Today, entrepreneurs from Lagos to Kigali, from Accra to Nairobi, are launching businesses thanks to a single man's decision to give back. Not because he had to, but because he never forgot that he was once just a kid, writing a letter, asking for a chance. Today, Tony Elumelu is worth over $700 million. He owns one of the most expensive private jets in Africa, a Dassault Falcon 7X, estimated at $60 million. His home in Ikoyi, Lagos, is more than just a mansion. It's a sanctuary of luxury, elegance, and world-class African art. A personal gallery of sculptures and paintings, some worth millions of dollars, fills his private residence. And while most people buy concert tickets to see their favorite Afrobeat stars, Tony pays them to perform privately at his family's parties. He doesn't chase fame. He doesn't flaunt his wealth. He moves like a tycoon, in silence, with intent. Behind the scenes, he sits on the boards of multiple corporations. He advises presidents. He influences policy across Africa. And yet, he still makes time for what he calls his real legacy, his family. He's a father to 5 children, including a set of triplet daughters, all raised alongside his wife Vivian, whom he married back in 1993. In interviews, when asked what matters most, he always comes back to the same answer: family first, always. Because no matter how high he climbs, no matter how big the empire becomes, Tony Elumelu never forgets where he came from. And maybe that's the secret, the reason he still rises. He's never just building for himself, he's building for something greater. From selling photocopiers, to running a global bank, from being rejected for not meeting requirements, to becoming the man Harvard studies. Tony Elumelu's story isn't just about money. It's not just about power. It's about what happens when hard work meets bold vision and a little bit of luck. The lesson: you don't need permission to be great. You just need one chance and the courage to say, if you give me the opportunity, I'll prove myself. Because sometimes the world doesn't open doors, you kick them open. And Tony Elumelu, he's just getting started. But what if I told you there are another African billionaires whose rise was even more controversial, one whose empire was built in the shadows, and whose story has never fully been told? That's coming next. Stay tuned.